Okay, what's that?
Like staring at a big black hole.
One of the cool things you can do with that in science. Tidbits. I'm sure my dad would enjoy to see this.
It's gonna be posted on YouTube.
Oh, can you send me the link?
Like, okay.
That way I can send it to my dad.
Oh, he wants to make a BB-8 too?
Oh, no.
Oh, he's interested? Again, how it's made?
Yeah, he's interested in this guy. He's a former engineer. He used to work on the Arsenal.
Cool.
He retired last year, actually.
What time does the actual panel start?
2:45. Starting in about 3 minutes.
I know I'm filming like 5 minutes of this. I'm like, might cut this part.
Yeah.
Maybe because of the music that's playing in the background.
Maybe cut the music.
I can't. I don't have that technology. Mostly because of copyright, because YouTube and copyright and little channels, they hate it. They hate them.
I can't hear the music, so.
Yeah.
With other people talking, it's easier to hear people talking than the music, so.
If there's anyone watching this video, I want to say, congratulations. You have lots of patience.
Or I could just say, hey, why don't you cut to such and such time? Oh wait, we won't be able to know that until the panel actually starts. That'll be in the comments, I guess.
Just going, I was patient enough.
Yep.
Alright, hello everybody.
Hello.
We got a little bit of time to kill so that some stragglers can make it in here. So I just want to take one moment and give a public service announcement. So many of you have seen this shirt, which is supposed to be 3 jokes in one because it's a picture of a Dalek and it says, "Oh my God, it's R2-D2. I loved him in Star Trek." R2-D2 is in Star Trek. In the 2 J.J. Abrams films, he has a brief cameo. In the first one, he is in the wreckage among the planet Vulcan. And in the second one, when the Vengeance attacks the Enterprise at warp speed and you see the side of the ship rip open, you do see R2-D2 fly out of the Enterprise. So the more you know.
That's the most interesting public service announcement I've heard.
Yep.
That's true.
And $8.50 for shipping. It costs $8.50 because it's ship over, and I guess shipping to customers, etc. That wasn't caught on camera, was it?
Probably.
I hope they didn't hear me muttering under my breath.
Maybe. Or maybe they just won't care.
Yeah, if you're on the internet, or especially YouTube, and you hear swearing
Alright,
in a video that has absolutely nothing to do with it, well, why are you on YouTube?
And we'll start a long time ago at a hotel on US 72 by the Madison Square Mall. So this is the 5th year of Kasterborous, and at the very first con, I debuted my first robot, Dalek Braun. Now, how many of you were actually at that convention? Okay, a good number of you. Now you might remember back then Braun did not have his robotics in yet. He basically was just a static prop we stuck in the back corner for photo ops. 3 months later, after a lot of research and development, Braun was motorized and he went to Dragon Con and has become known around the southern, southeastern, the Tennessee Valley area cons like, GMX, anything in Nashville, Birmingham, Atlanta, as Dalek Braun. And he's been going around for about 4 years. This weekend is actually his birthday. And I've had a lot of success with him. A lot of people have smiled, cool stories, because when you go to work or school and you say I was attacked by a Dalek, no one's going to believe you. Last year at this convention, I unveiled my second robot, which was one I wanted since I was 8 years old, which was R2-D2, which I named Goddard. And many of you have probably had a chance to meet him last year, and he's been going around to pretty much every event, and even some charity events over the last year, particularly with the release of The Force Awakens. Now, the funny part about R2 is I started construction late in 2014, which meant the world had its first glimpse of BB-8. So for the last year, everywhere R2 has gone, I have been asked, have you figured out how to make BB-8? Are you working on BB-8? When are we going to see a working BB-8? Is BB-8 real in the movie? So today I'm going to answer all those questions, and obviously you see I did make a BB-8, so this is weird. The whole reason he exists is because I'm an aerospace engineer by trade, and just the challenge of making something that you never see, because there's no practical reason to make a rolling ball with a head on top. But the challenge of trying to make this work and apply all that math and physics I learned in school was just an opportunity I couldn't pass up. So we're going to get into the physics and how this works, and I hope you'll learn something today. So next slide, please. So let's go over the brief history of BB-8. As many of you know, today is June of 2016. The first glimpse of BB-8 occurred on the day after Thanksgiving, 2014, when the teaser trailer for The Force Awakens was released. BB-8 was the second character to appear after Finn. And the world, for several months, the world only had about a 3-second glimpse of the soccer ball with a head on top. There was no sense of scale, there was no clear shot of what his panels looked like, and if you watch the trailer today, it looks like the panels are not silver, they're blue. And many people were debating whether BB-8 was a CG prop or what was it. Several months later at Celebration Anaheim, or Celebration 7, during a panel where they were introducing the main cast, a working BB-8 rolled on stage for the first time, and the world saw that yes, BB-8 is a practical prop, and that a rolling ball with a head on top can work. Now in turn, at that convention, many fans were able to get very detailed pictures and finally realize about what scale he is and a rough idea about how the studio made him work. And then in December of 2015, we finally got to see the movie he's in. And then it came out on DVD, digital, or whatever you kids use today, in April of 2016. So BB-8 has not been around for a while. Now, to compare that to something else, Daleks have been around since the 60s. That particular model of Dalek has been around since 2005, and R2-D2 is 39 years old. So BB has not been around a while. Next slide. So I get asked a lot about how is BB-8 actually in the movie. Because everyone is like, well, BB-8's a real prop in the movie. He's rolling on his own, right? Not quite. But before I get into BB-8, I want to mention how R2-D2 came to life for the 1977 film. Star Wars: A New Hope was a very low-budget movie at the time. and robotics were pretty much non-existent in 1976. So in order to bring R2-D2 to life, there are actually about 8 different versions in the original film. One of them is they would stick Kenny Baker inside, so scenes that you see the droid moving, that's an actor inside. There's a droid designed to have the third leg pop out. There's a droid designed to have the periscope and the probe arm come out. A R2-D2 was built for 8 R2-D2s were built for very specific functions to do one thing and one thing only. So there is no one R2-D2. Now at conventions, fans over the last 40 years, particularly in the last 20 years since we've had this thing called the internet, have pooled the resources and figured out, okay, how can we actually make an R2-D2 that can roll for a full convention? And I've seen some people even get crazy where they have walking droids now. So R2-D2 in the original film is the culmination of several props to create a practical special effect, meaning R2 wasn't CGI'd into the film. He is a prop, but he's still not a robot. So next slide. So as far as how BB-8 is actually in the film, he's not a rolling droid by his own power. He is a practical prop, meaning the actors actually see a BB-8, but how he moves is not self-contained. In many scenes, particularly for the shots in Jakku, has everyone actually seen The Force Awakens? Okay, spoilers. So for sand scenes, you would see a gentleman in green is operating the droid with rods, and you may have seen a GIF on your social media pages of a gentleman running behind and pushing BB-8. Because to be honest, a rolling ball, no matter how you design it, will not roll on sand. It won't be able to get traction. Other scenes, you'll see it has this robot mechanism behind it that holds the head in place and keeps the droid upright. So many scenes, like particularly in the Rebel base, that's how the droid would move, and then what they would do is instead of painting BB-8 into the scene, they would digitally remove the actor or the mechanism that moves BB-8. So there is no self-contained rolling BB-8 in the actual movie. Next slide. But there is a working BB-8 that was developed. I don't know exactly which company built it right now. But they developed this droid shortly before the Celebration Anaheim, and then they used this droid for red carpet events to promote the film. And if any of you actually watched the Academy Awards, BB-8 came out with R2-D2 and C-3PO on stage during the ceremony. So there is proof that this design can work, at least to some degree. So the big question is, how does this work? Next slide. So, fair warning, we are using math and science. So first off, I have to discuss stability. So here I have 3 examples of a ball. The blue dot represents where the center of gravity is, so the point it would balance, and the black point represents the center of the ball. Now, in all 3 of these examples, if I were to let go of the ball right now, none of them would move. The question is, what happens if I were to poke it? The unstable version on the left, what would happen is the center of gravity will be over an area not covered by the center of rotation, and the ball is going to rotate until the center of gravity reaches the bottom, which is its naturally stable point, which you see on the right. So the ball on the right, if I were to poke it, it's going to act like a pendulum. It's going to shift, but the weight's going to bring it back to exactly where it started. The one in the middle, it won't topple over, but it's not going to move either. It's going to stay exactly where you left it or stay in its current trajectory of motion, depending on how much friction's involved. Go ahead. So we want the ball to be stable, which means in order for this to work and stay upright, the weight has to be as low as possible on the ball. So how does the ball actually move? Well, it's a matter of shifting its weight. So in the slide all the way on the left, you'll see what the ball is at rest. So we have the center of mass sitting directly above the green point. Now let's say I instantaneously shift the mass over to the red point. Well, now what's going to happen is it wants to rotate on that black dot until the center of gravity is straight down, which means the ball has now moved to its red point. So by shifting the center of mass forward or backwards, we can make the droid move forwards or backwards. So that's the basic concept. Now there's actually two ways this can be done with a ball. Next slide. The first method is what we call the hamster drive. As many of you have seen, if you have a small hamster or rodent, they make these clear plastic balls that you can put the hamster inside, and as the hamster moves around the ball rotates to follow the hamster. This is the same setup we have here, except instead of a small mammal, we have a robot. So in this case, we have two drive wheels that make contact with the ball, and then we have some casters to make sure that everything just stays kind of upright in there. And by driving this hamster inside the ball, we can make it go anywhere we want. Next slide. The other mechanism is what's called a pendulum drive. So one of the issues with a hamster is the entire inside of the ball has to be smooth because the hamster is going to drive over the entire surface of the ball. Now, one way we can get around that is if we attach the motor directly to the center of rotation, it will force and suspend a mass from the center. It will force the ball to move because the mass is going to keep the ball wanting to stay in a certain position. The way you would steer this type of mechanism is simply by shifting your weight left to right, like how you would ride a bike or a motorcycle, and that will cause the droid to bank to make a circle. Or you can rotate the counterbalance by itself and cause the droid to spin on point. Now, this is what we believe the Anaheim droid is because of the way it moves. Because we can see that the stickers stick on the decals never shift sides of the ball, and you can, if you watch closely, because Star Wars fans are picky about everything, you can almost picture the invisible axis that is inside this droid. So the hamster has a lot of benefits. You don't need a uniform ball. If you want opening panels, that's pretty much how you have to do it. There's just one problem. Next slide. The hamster drives over the entire surface of the ball because it can go any direction. The pendulum will always ride the same track, so the same ring is always going to be what touches the ground. Now this presents a problem because, as you can see, it's a painted surface that touches the ground. Now, right now, we don't have a lot of data how well painted surfaces hold up because most prop builders are like, oh, you're going to put the painted surface on the ground. You're an idiot. So I went with the hamster drive, so as the paint wears, it wears uniformly across the ball instead of creating one noticeable ring that everyone's going to see. My basic design is the hamster, and that's what you see before you here. So once I decided what my drive system needed to be, I had to find the components that actually will be BB-8 and design around those. So next slide. So the ball itself, so let me back up a little bit. There is a BB-8 Builders Club that formed on Facebook where a bunch of people, not just myself, have been getting together and trying to figure out how you make this work. What are the dimensions? What are possible drive mechanisms? So I'm not the only one who's built BB-8. Now, one of the things the club members figured out early on is we actually identified the company that made the plastic sphere for the Anaheim droid, which is what we call the One at Celebration, and figured out it's a 20-inch diameter, half-inch thick polycarbonate hemispheres. There's a company in California that produces these, and basically I went ahead and went on a run and got my set. So you see here it starts off as a clear ball, and it's designed to be as close to a sphere. It's not exact, but it's better than anything you could make at home. Next slide. So speaking about the ball, I often get asked how does the ball actually stay together. It uses this magical product called tape. So basically what you'll see on the right is there's about 24 pins inside the ball that keep the two hemispheres from sliding on each other and ensure they're always aligned so that the decals always match up. As far as keeping the ball from splitting open, it's 4 pieces of clear Gorilla Tape around the ball, and the reason for that is the ball is very expensive, and the inside has to be smooth, the outside has to be smooth, and there's not a lot of room to work, so the tape works, no one's noticed the tape, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Next slide. This question came up in my panel yesterday about machining and fancy equipment. I'm slowly learning to machine aluminum, but I'm not really comfortable with it. I like working with woodworking. That's what I grew up with. So I knew my motors, I want to be something that I wasn't going to have to spend a lot of time machining. And that's where I came up with this combination. So the drive, there are 2 motors inside BB-8. They are MPC 2122s, which actually have been used on some models of R2D2, and a Coulson wheel. And this selection was chosen because the soft wheel would conform to the form of the ball on the inside. And the wheel has a 1/2-inch shaft that matches the 1/2-inch shaft of the motor, so I literally can just put the 2 together and I'm ready to rock and roll. Next slide. And then in terms of power, sizing for batteries is always a little tricky because you want enough that the Droid can run for, my goal is always about 6 hours bare minimum. I like to aim for 12 so I can do a whole convention. But BB-8 is much smaller than R2D2 and the Dalek, so it had to be a large enough battery that would last, but also had to actually fit in the ball itself. And I settled on actually going with the same model of battery that's used in R2D2, which is lead acid 10 amp hour batteries. I've had very good success with these working and recharging, plus they weigh about 6 pounds apiece, so if I arrange things carefully, I could use them as ballast as well. Next slide. So frame development. A lot of people like to use 3D modeling and 3D printers for pretty much everything nowadays, nice CNC parts. I'm very rusty on 3D modeling and my computer kind of sucks. So what I did was I did the old-fashioned Apollo era of I took a piece of graph paper and a pencil and a calculator and figured out, based on the equation of a circle, what are my dimensions that can fit it based on height and width, and basically figured out how far the motors were and started building prototypes out of MDF. MDF is a very cheap wood. You can get wood. You can get it at any hardware store, and I built several prototypes to see how things would fit before I started working on the plywood, which is stronger and much more durable. Next slide. So BB-8 went through 2 main prototypes. So this is prototype 1. So you see I have my 2 motors with the rubber wheels, and I have my 2 batteries and my and a 10-pound counterweight to put the mass low in this setup. And then all my electronics are on a baseboard where I can reach them. Now, I did several test runs with this droid, and I found one little problem. Go ahead, next slide. With the motors mounted high up, you get a lot, because of the angle it actually contacts the ball, what it wants to do is it's taking all the weight and trying to force the 2 halves apart. And in my prototype phase, I realized the tape was not going to hold this setup at all. Now, stepping back after, a night of swearing, I realized, well, if I put the motors as low as possible to put the contact point low on the ball, it's going to decrease the amount of force that actually is trying to split this globe open. So with that in mind, go ahead. This is version 2. So here my motors, instead of being almost all the way across the ball, they are as close as possible, like the motors are literally touching each other, and are about, I believe, 8 inches apart and touching the ball almost on the bottom. This has resulted in there's almost no side force pushing the ball apart. As I mentioned, weight is key, and you need a lot of ballast to cause this thing to move forward without the head going all the way back when you try to start up. So to make that ballast, I have my batteries as low as possible on here, where they won't touch the globe. And then I have some barbells literally bolted on here to keep the weight down. And as you can see in the picture of the globe, all my weight is below the equator, which means my center of gravity is well below the center of rotation, which means this design is naturally stable. Go ahead. So the number one question I've been asked the last 3 weeks is, how does the head stay on? Magnets. So what you see here is there's a plate on the inside, and then there's a plate. So this mechanism is what bolts onto BB-8's head, and there's 4 magnets in each plate. The 3 outer ones are rated about 65 pounds, and the one in the center is 115 pounds. If I were to take those 2 magnets and put one on each side of my hand, I would break my hand. So these are very dangerous to work with. You want to make sure all your metal tools are off the bench. And one of the most frustrating things about this build was, you'll notice the magnets are not actually close to each other in this setup. There is about an inch, inch and a half. Magnets pull force is exponential. When they're next to each other, they have the most force, but when you move them apart, the force is very weak. So I had to find the exact balance where they're strong enough that the head won't fall off if the droid moves around, but weak enough that the ball won't be clamped between those 2 plates. So that took about a week of unbolting the magnet, putting it on, driving, and see what worked best. Go ahead. Now, as far as how the head actually follows the motor, there's this aluminum bracket that goes to the top of the droid. The ball itself is not a uniform sphere, so the green piece of foam there is that top plate can move up and down in relation to the plate below it, so it compensates for the diameter difference inside the ball. Because BB-8's ball can change any direction, I have to use the head to know what direction's forward. So I have a servo that keeps the head aligned forward, but I can also turn it 90 degrees to the left or 90 degrees to the right, so I can strafe while I'm rolling. There's a scene in the trailer where BB-8's rolling alongside Rey, and he's looking at Rey. So this allows me to do that feat. Otherwise, he's always looking straight ahead. Go ahead. The dome design, this is a part of the reason this project started when it did. Originally, I was going to finish my Mark Watney suit and then start this, but my friend Dan, gave me a 3D print of the head for my birthday. There's the BB-8 Builders Club. Several modelers came together and made a 3D model of the head. And many people on the club have been 3D printing these, finishing them up, and then that's usually the end of hearing from them, because then they're don't know how to do a drive system. Now the 3D print is nice, but it's heavy and it's fragile, and it's not a good thing to put on the robot. So what I did was I made a rubber mold, and then mine is actually fiberglass, so it's less than half the weight of the 3D print, but very much stronger. Go ahead. So with all that in mind, and if you were to put the exact electronics that are in my R2-D2 into BB-8, the droid's going to roll. One small problem. BB-8 is an inverted pendulum. He makes contact with the ground at one point, and he has a center of mass that can move on either side of that contact point. So what happens is, if the ball is rolling and comes to a stop, he has, if the ball leans, he's building potential energy because he wants the spring back. And much like the pendulum on a clock, what will happen is we just let go, it's going to move, it's going to be fastest at the top, and then it's going to slow down, build up more potential energy, and go back. And he's just going to keep rocking back and forth. Now, carpet dampens this, but not well enough. So we needed some way to make sure he's not just bouncing all over the place. place. Go ahead. So we added a stability loop. Unlike my other droids, BB-8 actually measures where he is at any given time. So what BB-8 is doing in a nutshell, disclaimer, it took me a while to figure out like what is the most non-technical way to explain this, so bear with me. So basically, when BB-8 leans, he senses he's leaning, and he figures out how much power to give to the motors to correct that action. So instead of just going past the midpoint, he's going to consciously slow down and move his motors to keep his head upright. So the way this is done, go ahead, is the addition of stability hardware. How many people were in the panel yesterday? Okay. So remember when I said channel 2 is the one that tells the droid to move forward and backwards? Instead of being plugged directly into the speed controller, we now have it plugged into a SparkFun breadboard, which is the equivalent of an Arduino Uno, so it's a little microprocessor. And it's taking the input from my receiver, and it's also taking the input from what's called an internal measurement unit, or an IMU, which is measuring BB-8's angle on all 3 axes. So this hardware measures where the droid is, calculates his angle and the command I'm telling him to do, and calculates how much power to give to the motors. Next slide. So here you see I have my laptop, I have a bunch of notes, and I have BB-8's prototype, and I'm trying to plug this in, program this. So the 2 subjects I absolutely hated in college were control theory and computer programming. So here I am trying to program a control theory onto an Arduino. So what he's running is what's called a proportional integral derivative loop, or a PID loop. And I have to set several gains so that he doesn't overshoot, but he's trying to correctly get to where he wants to go. And I had to also teach myself how to program an Arduino, so I'm reading books and trying to make the little LED blink in the tutorial, and then jumping to this. So if you want to know what this process was like, I actually have a little video clip of the process if we go to the next slide. Next slide, please. I still don't know how my neighbors didn't call the cops. It was rough. So sound. All 3 droids pretty much have the exact same sound system. Now on Braun and R2-D2, what's going on is we have our SparkFun wave trigger, which is in the middle, and we have our 12-channel remote, which is how I tell it what sound to play. Now on the other 2 droids, this is just hooked up to an amplifier which is connected to a car speaker. That's why Braun will break people's eardrums and why you can hear R2-D2 pretty well in a convention center. BB-8 has a little bit of a problem. I can't put the speaker in the ball because will never hear it. I can't put the control mechanism and the soundboard in his head because it would make the head too heavy and it would just fall off. So the way I got around that challenge is this little black box in the corner here is actually a Bluetooth transmitter. So the way BB-8 sound happens is instead of playing directly to the speaker, it plays this transmitter and goes to a cheap Bluetooth speaker in his head. So several people I know who have been trying to build BB-8 have actually put the speaker on their belt. And for me, while that works, I really want the sound to come from the droid, because particularly like when he goes to children's hospitals, I don't want to destroy the suspension of disbelief, so I want them to believe this is BB-8, so I'm very adamant the sound has to come from the droid. So he's not the loudest of the 3 robots, but it still gives him some character. Go ahead. So the finish, the ball was clear when I started, and it stayed clear during the prototyping phase, so I could see what was actually going along going on with the electronics, what was getting jammed, what was catching on fire, stuff like that.
Wait,
Nothing caught on fire. So the way he was finished is the ball and the head were painted with acrylic paints. The head, the orange and silver, were masked off and painted on. The body, a gentleman named Corey Pacquione, who was one of the first people to build a BB-8, developed these graphics, which we call the Plan B decals. And basically it comes as a flat sheet and we cut it up and put it on our droid. So it's automotive grade vinyl. And then the lines that connect these circles are actually Sharpie. Now BB-8 does not look right at all when he's clean. So we weathered him using what's called an acrylic wash. So if you go to Michael's, you'll find those little tubes of acrylic paint. They're like 99 cents a piece. And what you do is you wipe it on, and then using a damp rag, you wipe it off. And basically, you just keep repeating this so you build up a layer of grime on the droid. Go ahead. So this is BB-8's third convention. He's logged about 20 hours. He's holding up pretty good. His paint has held up remarkably well. I've only had a few bugs here or there. He's not perfect, and he is very experimental. As I mentioned earlier, there's about 20 years and thousands of R2-D2s worth of data on the R2 Builders Club. Daleks have been researched for, almost 50 years now. The animatronic part of it, that's more or less based on R2-D2s. BB-8 has been around for about a year and a half. To the best of my knowledge, this is number 8. So this is very much a prototype. This is very much a learning experience. So one thing though is when I get around to version 2, whenever I lose my mind, BB-8 is only stabilized on one axis right now, forward and backwards, because he's using his motors to stabilize himself. He is not stabilized side to side yet. I ran out of time and decided to go with him as he is because I wanted to have him available for this convention, and I'm also working on Mark Watney from The Martian for DragonCon. When I get around to version 2, my plan is to add side-to-side stability by having a shifting counterweight on the inside, so much like the pendulum droid I mentioned earlier, he can shift left to right and hopefully stabilize himself on both axes, so then he'll get rid of the drunken wobble he kind of has right now. Go ahead. So that's how I got to here. As I mentioned in the panel yesterday, this is going to be the last droid for a while. I'm going to try to do, depending how finances and time look this fall, I'll try working on version 2. For me, this was a very rewarding experience because a lot of the props and costumes I've been working on have been mostly artistic endeavors. It's how do you make it cosmetically look like what you want. And the whole concept of actually making something work that doesn't seem practical was a very unique experience. So I hope you found that informative. I hope you can answer some of these questions when they come up. For people in the convention hall who weren't cool enough to come here. And we'll open the floor up to questions. Thank you. Seriously?
We're all
right, sure.
Is it more competition or more collaboration working with these online sites and clubs?
There's a sense of pride of being like one of the early ones, but it is a collaboration, because keep in mind, like, I did not design the 3D print for the head or the decals. At the same time, some people are learning from, we all publish our build logs on the BB-8 Builders Club so people can learn from what we did. And that's the same thing with R2-D2 and the Daleks. So while I do like being a rock star with, like the R2-D2 and, for at least for most of the time was the only Dalek, I do want to see more people building robots, particularly one of the ones I didn't build Like I would love to see someone with a canine or a chopper at some point. Yes?
When you said you go around to children's clinics and that sort of thing, have you visited schools locally? Talk to kids?
Okay, the question was, you know, have I gone to, I've done the hospitals, have I gone to schools? I haven't done a school yet. BB-8's only like 3 weeks old, so he hasn't been invited. R2-D2, I've had several people express interest, but nothing's come up yet. A lot of the appearances with the Star Wars droids are kind of organized by the 501st because people contact them and they're like, hey, can you bring costume characters and stuff to here? Like that's how the children's hospital visits got organized. That's part of the reason he doesn't get invited too much because it's people who know this con get a hold of me through that, but the Star Wars thing is based all in Alabama, so you know when there's an event in Birmingham or Huntsville, I hear more about that.
I think certainly for FIRST Robotics and that sort of the STEM initiatives, especially locally with the young robotics clubs, I know my son's been part of that. I think that could be really inspiring to kids here locally.
Yes, one of the things I actually do want to do with BB-8 at some point is there's a lot of practical physics examples in him, especially from introductory physics about control theory, center of gravity, force diagrams. I would love to make a series of YouTube videos or even more detailed presentations about, you know, and actually use him as a teaching tool for physics. And in terms of like inspiration for STEM, that is one of the things I like to do. I actually had a gentleman come up and it's like, oh, I got interested in robotics because I met the Dalek and I wanted to build one. And I believe there is a member of one of those robot teams because of that. So yeah, if I can get more people interested in math and science, that's what I'd like to do. That's also why I'm presenting this panel instead of like, no, my BB-8, go figure it out yourself. All right, yes?
How long did it take to build it?
Okay, how long did it take to build? It's a weird one to answer with this one. So Braun took 8 months because he was the only thing I worked on for 8 months. R2-D2 took 4 months because he was the only thing I worked on for 4 months. BB-8 shared my shop with 5 other projects. BB-8, I was making Christmas presents in December. I was working on my Martian spacesuit. I was working on fixing R2 because R2's foot broke and I had to replace it. I think if you actually add it up, it's about 3 to 4 months on BB-8, and most of that was designing the internal mechanisms. Like cosmetically, you could do it in a weekend. But it was just trial and error and learning the program that took all that time. Yes?
Have you ever tried C-3PO?
3PO is a suit, and I know one person who might fit in it, and she's not having any of it. Yes?
Have you thought about doing Mars Pathfinder if you're wanting to?
Good question. Have I thought about doing the Mars Pathfinder? Yes, but not for Watney. So actually, as I mentioned, you know, Braun is named after rocket scientist Werner von Braun. My R2-D2 is named after Robert Goddard, who developed the liquid rocket propulsion, and BB-8 is named Weir after the author of The Martian because I had to science the shit out of him. Now, the Sojourner rover from the Mars Pathfinder mission has always been on my wish list because I think that is the one I want to take to schools because I love sci-fi, I love my geekdom, but I'm a space geek by heart and I love the practical thing like, hey, we actually did put a man on the moon, beat that, Iron Man. And yeah, so Sojourner is on my wish list. The thing is, there's a lot of stuff I have to learn first. I have to really become comfortable with an Arduino because of the way it works, and I have to get some help from my coworkers who machine aluminum and actually spend the time to learn the 3D software so I can make the plans to build Sojourner. But no, that's a great visual aid. I would love to have a working demo of the Rocket Boogie system. It is on my wish list. I hope I can get it in the next 2 years sometime. Yes?
We already talked
Okay, how many lines are in each robot? How many lines of code are in each robot? 0. R2D2, 0. I think 112. So on the other two robots, they're what's called open. So it's like he asked like what the programming is. On the other two robots, they're what's called open loop systems, which means when I push forward on the stick, the robot is going to move forward. When I let go of the stick, the robot is going to stop. They're completely analog, so it's literally just the receiver plugged into the speed controller. Say again?
That's an interpreted device,
Yeah. On BB-8, he has to have that stability loop because otherwise he's going to constantly lean and wobble, so that's why he has to have that little bit of programming. R2 does have a program. It's his lights to create the blinking program. I did not make that program though. As I mentioned, R2D2, a lot of the stuff has already, the ground's been broken. And a gentleman several people came up with the code and the light kit, so it's literally you just find the kit, build the parts, and program it, which was like a Saturday worth of swearing anyway, because apparently the code doesn't work with the current Arduino, it works with the old Arduino code, so yeah, that was a headache. But yeah, I haven't done a lot of programming, I'm slowly learning. This was a good excuse to even get my feet wet with it, and we're going to go from there.
The reason I asked is how a lot of beginner programmers for that, they'll get it stuck in a loop and like turn left for about 50 times.
With the speed, so he's like beginning programmers, it gets stuck in a loop. I've never had a problem with that. I do have a kill switch if they ever were to misbehave. But yeah, I've never had them just go completely in circles. Yes?
Are you ever going to do TARS from Interstellar?
Am I ever going to do TARS from Interstellar? TARS is a walking costume. It's not a robot. In terms of future projects, long story short, I've been building very large-scale projects for 7 years. I've built 3 robots, several costumes, by the end of this year I'll have built 3 robots, 2 spacesuits, several suits of armor, like 10 proton packs, 2 portal guns, 6 mouse heads, 3 Daft Punk helmets, and a partridge in a pear tree. Now, the way I've been able to do that is I budgeted very, very carefully. I drive the same car I had in high school. My couch is well, let me put it this way. It came from the Salvation Army and my parents hate that couch. But this fall, unfortunately, I am at the point where I have to, be the grown-up and get a new car. So the large project scale is going to be on hold for 3 years. So during that time, I am going to be slowly learning to what I need to make Sojourner work. In terms of costumes, BB-8's done. I want to finish up my Mark Watney for DragCon. I'm about 60% done. I'm working with a gentleman who actually knows how to sew to put together Kylo Ren, because the programming process I think actually did a better job making me Kylo Ren than BB-8. And then it's going to be small stuff and maybe a couple commissions for the next 4 years. So in terms of stuff I personally want to build, there's a few props from Ruby I think would be small fun projects. And yeah, the Mars Sojourner is my kind of holy grail. Along with, I built a moon suit several years ago, and I would love to spend the time to actually perfect it. All right, doctor over there.
Have you ever tried to make like a miniature Millennial Falcon that was like RC?
Have I tried to make a mini remote-controlled Millennium Falcon? No, because I'm working with a group working on a full-size one. There is what's called the Falcon Project, and it's a group of people all over the world, particularly based here and in Nashville. Now, how many of you went to see Force Awakens in IMAX here in Huntsville at the Space and Rocket Center? All right. We have the full-size cockpit to the Millennium Falcon as is seen in Empire Strikes Back. There is a group of people who are trying to build the entire ship. Their Nashville group is currently working on the corridor that leads to the lounge area, and we're trying to perfect the cockpit. So the goal is eventually, through fundraising and whatnot, eventually we'll be able to buy land and actually build a whole Millennium Falcon. So if you're thinking I'm crazy, wait till you meet my friends. Yes.
You said you had a YouTube channel. Can I know what that is?
I have videos on YouTube. The best way to find them is if you go to the Facebook page, facebook.com/K7Lprops. There's a link there. I don't know what the name of the channel is. I think it's on my name. I'm still trying to reorganize it to be something that I can just say, hey, look up blank on YouTube. Yes?
Can you tell us a little bit about your day job? I mean, I know that this is how you spend your spare time, but I think people might be interested to know more about what you do.
What I do for my day job. So let me give you kind of the backstory. I can't go into too many details because of security clearances and stuff. I learned how to make stuff by building model rock. Well, even before that, I used to build houses with my dad. And then when I was 11, I received a model rocket kit for my birthday and just took off with that. So that's where all my money went, was building amateur rockets. And in high school, I actually was in a national competition for rocketry. And, you know, I grew up wanting to be an astronaut. I still want to be an astronaut, but, you know, that was the goal. So then I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and started getting my degree in aerospace engineering. And that's actually what I do for a living. I'm a rocket propulsion engineer for a small company here in Huntsville. So in terms of robots, I actually have 2 robotic landers that have been flying around Marshall Space Flight Center. Now during college, rocketry became my career and I wanted a hobby. You know, because I like to keep building things and keeping my hands busy. And I built a costume for Halloween, Jango Fett, and I loved the reaction I got from that. And then every Halloween, I was trying to just top myself off every year. And then when I moved down here, I actually was trying to build things with, you know, actual money. And met my upstairs neighbor who was a prop builder as well. So we've been operating under the name 2-Story Props. Just my individual page is A7L. And we've been building all sorts of crazy things. And that's kind of how that got started. Yes?
All the projects that you worked on, what was the most frustrating?
He asked, of all the projects I worked on, what was the most frustrating? Oh, so many. I would say the most frustrating one, and the one I thought would never get finished, was the Apollo moon suit, because I hate and am terrible at sewing. And the moon suit, like to build BB-8, I have a hard point that's a reference, and it's all hard points, so I can build around that. And the doll is woodworking. I know how to do that. To build a suit that you have to be able to move around in, and it has to be padded and look a certain way, is like, yeah. So my moon suit, I spent like 6 months trying 7 attempts to make a working jumpsuit, and then I finally got one where it's like, okay, this one doesn't look terrible, let's go with that. And then, yeah, put the rest together. And don't get me wrong, it looks great, but because I've studied the real ones since I was, you know, 6, it's like, okay, well, this stitch is missing, this stitch is missing, this valve is wrong, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, everyone's like, oh, this is accurate. I'm like, no, it's not. Yeah, it was rewarding. Like, I actually got a letter from Jim Lovell himself complimenting the suit. So funny thing with the moon suit, I post most of these things on the Replica Prop Forum. And there was this gentleman from California who came to town named Adam Savage for the Mythbusters tour. And I had the suit at the BBC on display for like what local makers make. And he's talking with the Falcon group because they had the cockpit on display. And then I walk in with my bubble helmet and he turns his head, it's like, wait, what? Because he's like big into spacesuits, and I'm walking him through, and he goes, oh wait, I know this suit. I've been following your bill. I've downloaded all your pictures. And I'm like, okay, Adam Savage is stalking me online. and then it gets even funnier because he's like, oh, I see you you made a mold for your boots, right? Yeah, I made a silicone mold. Can I buy a pair? Sure. So yeah, I spent moon boots to M5 Studios. So yeah, that was the most frustrating because it was the whole sewing thing and trying to make it work. Once I was able to get to connectors and stuff, the build went pretty well, where I had rigid things to build on. I'm getting better. Like we finally spent the time to make a duct tape mannequin so I can do some stitching and whatnot. But yeah, that was probably the most frustrating. Everything's frustrating in its own way, but that was the one. It's like, what am I doing? Any more?
One last question. Have you taken any of these robots to St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis?
I haven't been to the one in Memphis. R2D2's been to the one in Birmingham, the Children's of Alabama. He's been there twice. He was there for the opening of The Force Awakens, and he was there for May the 4th. Main reason he went was BB-8 wasn't done yet. Eventually, I'm hoping to get a second radio so then the two of them can go and interact with the patients. Yes?
You said that you sent a boot to Adam Savage. You know if that's one of the ones they used for testing the imprint and the
No, the question was the boot I sent used in the Mythbuster special? This was years after. Yes?
What age did you actually build your first one? First anything? What age?
Oh, I know someone's going to give me crap about this. I built my first amateur rocket at 11. I built the first one I designed at 16. The one that was on CNN was when I was 18. I built my first, high adult Halloween costume, grown-up costume, not, kinky, when I was 19. I built Braun back in 2000. I got my job in 2009, so I was about 24 when I started doing the, the props that cost like, 4 digits. Braun was the first robot. He was built when I was 20. He was built 4 years ago, so I would have been about 25, 26. And if you have to know, I'm 31 now. All right, any more?
Do you have a favorite robot? I mean, if you took these guys away, favorite science fiction robot?
Oh, Sophie's Choice. They're all unique in their own way. R2 has a special place in my heart because I actually wanted R2 since I was 8. So kind of going to why all 3 of them exist. In 2011, I built a Big Daddy for Dragon Con, put it in the costume contest. I lost to a dress because the judges were theater seamstresses and they're talking about the threading and stitching, and they don't notice like I sculpted the nuts on my helmet. They just see the chromy jumpsuit. So I'm like, what can I build that doesn't have thread in it? So originally when Braun was built, I was supposed to sit in him, which is why his arms do move and they have handles on the inside, but once the wheelchair and the sound went in, he just became a remote control prop. R2D2 was put off for many years because I was trying to build unique things people haven't seen, like the Dalek and the moon suit and the subject Delta Big Daddy. And R2D2, if you go to like any major, like the huge conventions where it's several thousand people, you're gonna find an R2D2 if you look long enough. Like Dragon Con, there's usually like a little herd of them. Now, what ended up happening with R2 was, they announced they're making a new Star Wars movie, and I was actually buying a house, and I didn't have time for a prop, but I do my budgets monthly. So I had the funds available, so I was like, okay, well, I've always wanted R2-D2. They're gonna have the movie. I would love to do, I'm sure everyone's gonna be doing promotions and stuff. I love to finally have my droid, so I started accruing parts. And then when the trailer came out, after I settled in my house, it's like, okay, well, let's build R2-D2. This will break my shop in. And that's how I got my R2-D2. So I love my R2-D2. It's there are many like it, but this one is mine. So he has a special place in my heart. And like I said, BB-8 was just the whole, okay, I'm an engineer. I can make this work. Stop complaining. It can't be done. Yes.
Did you sew that faux jacket?
No, the jacket came up from fjackets.com. The purple coat you see when I'm the doctor, yes, I made that. This was just kind of a last minute thing because I don't have a Star Wars costume when I'm driving R2-D2, but then I realized, oh wait, I can get the fin jacket and this stuff and it'll work, because normally I'm thinking like, wow, that jumpsuit's going to be really, really hot and cumbersome. So then this was put together like a week before the first convention. Eventually I'll have the X-Wing helmet to go with it, but first things first. Right, any more? Come on. All right, well, okay, yes.
BB-8, have you tested them on inclines or different?
Okay.